Well, I hate to end good conversation, but I hope we can continue those conversations over lunch and other breaks. So I don't want to take away from our excellent panel here today. So this is panel two. What are we talking about anyway? So the ever shifting boundaries and categories of non-degree credentials. We have an excellent panel here. We've got Melanie Gottlieb from the American Association of Collegiate Registrars and Admissions Officers, ACRO. We've got Noah Geisel from the University of Colorado at Boulder, done a lot of great work on badging. We have Hiro Okahana from American Council on Education and Scott Cheney from Credential. So I think we're going to have a very lively and interesting conversation. Before we get started with each panelist, I just wanted to spend a minute recognizing that this conversation around defining credentials has been a long and ongoing one, and some of the folks who've been in this room have been around the block a few times and probably like, Michelle, why are we even talking about definitions at this point? Like, haven't we figured this out? And we have figured out some things. So I want to just acknowledge, I think, some contributions in the field that I think really do structure our conversations. And so I'm looking at Roy right here. I should have him talk about this slide, Roy Swift from WorkCred, which I think is a very good guiding set of definitions for credentials that many of us all know, but I think are really valuable just to kind of return to and ground ourselves in the fact that we do know what a certificate is. We do know that it's different from a certification. Yay! And that's different from a degree. And it's different from a license. I won't go through into all the gory details about each of them. You can take a look at the WorkCred definitions, read them online if you haven't studied them extensively. But I think it's important to recognize we do sort of have that landscape. I think those are potentially some ideas that this group has agreed upon, that these are terms that we have some sense of what they are. So, okay. I wanted to just share another definition taxonomy that I think is really useful. I was hoping actually that Chris Mullen could also be here today, but he had a conflict and wasn't able to. But from Lumina, Chris has wrote a paper last year that I think is a useful definition that we can use to think about this broader credentialing landscape. And so he gives us this overarching idea that, credentials writ large are broken down into three different kinds, and those are micro, macro, and maintenance. So our macro credential is like a very broad degree or credential that marks like a body of knowledge, a set of competencies that are around a broad body of knowledge. So think, you have that, and now you can enter fully into an occupation. You know all the skills you need to know. Whereas a micro credential in his taxonomy is something much more specific. It marks a very specific skill, specific competency that, might help you get into a job, but it's not everything you need to know for a job. And then the other category that he also puts out there is one that I think we don't often talk a lot about is maintenance credentials. And that's, something that's sort of to mark ongoing knowledge and attainment and education. So I just put that out there. Since Chris isn't here to speak for himself, I wanted to just share that with the group. And I'm going to stop talking at this point and turn things over to our panelists and let them, have a chance to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about each of them. I want each of them to go around and just sort of talk about their work on credentialing and what are some of the points of alignment with credential definition. So I'll ask Melanie maybe to kick us off and talk about some of the great work at ACRO.
Absolutely. Oh, it is on. All right. I'm Melanie Gottlieb. I'm the executive director of ACRO. Our members are the keepers of the credential at the institution. ACRO members, both at the front end, assess credentials as they enter an institutional academic pathway, and they are the holders and the keepers of the integrity of the academic credential within the institution. A lot of the work that we are doing right now is focused on a couple of things that are relevant to this space. We are doing lots of work around the expansion of the traditional academic transcript, work in the LER space, the learning and employment record space. How do we better articulate the skills and the competencies that are required in the academic environment and translate those into the workforce environment in real data ways so that it can engage in this evolving ecosystem that is occurring. We're also, actually, I'm going to stop there so I don't spend too much time, and there's a lot of work happening in the space. The last panel, I was like sitting on my hands because I just wanted to say so many things.
Good morning, Noah Geisel. I'm a Micro-Credentials Program Manager at University of Colorado Boulder, as well as a co-producer of the annual Badge Summit Conference, July 21 to 23 in Boulder, if anybody wants to join us. And I think what resonates for me that I just wanted to share is, piggybacking off of Michelle's comment of the power of curation. And so I don't really want to say anything new. I just want to curate what the people before us said. With Manny's three assumptions, I think that really connects, to the culture shift that we don't talk about enough as far as change goes. And I loved Corey's Radio Shack example. I think there's just so much there that also probably in a curatorial sense we could connect to Paul's point about the lack of transfer between the skills and the industrial credentials, industry credentials that we're seeing. And so I just am really focused on meaning making right now, I guess, is a shorter way of saying that. And how do we make sense in ways that help us operationalize credentials to actually be able to, manifest the LER ecosystem, a learning and employment record ecosystem that this can all create for learners and earners.
Hi, everybody. My name is Hiro. I work at the American Council on Education. It's ACE. ACE is a hardware store. So, I'm not sure how many of you know what ACE does. We do a lot of lobbying and the government relations kind of work, and most of the organization are busy defending the higher education as we know it. And you get the least important person come and speak at this event. At least important, at least insightful person, I suppose. So, ACE, we focus a lot on higher education, but we are not American Council on Colleges and Universities. We are American Council on Education for a good reason, I think. In higher education, we have sort of HEA portion of higher education that happens, that people take courses and go work toward a degree. In a traditional form of degree. But at ACE, for the long time, we've been working with the colleges and universities on the degree granting side, but also the post-secondary education that happens outside of traditional classroom space. Some of you might know, and I think there's a reference to it earlier today. We do provide the ACE credit recommendations work for prior learning, prior learning assessment, and also military learning part of it. So that's the part of the ACE that has interaction with this non-degree side of the work. And also, right now, with the funding from Lumina Foundation, we are working on the project around the non-degree programs as a part of our broader Carnegie classification work. Carnegie classifications, as you know, it kind of help us make sense of colleges and universities in a few different ways. One big one is sort of based on highest degrees conferred, and also research activities. And the thought is that, well, colleges and universities produce a lot of non-degree credentials. So what if maybe there are ways that we should be thinking about sort of making sense of our institutions based on types of non-degree credential that they are conferring around it. So that's kind of our interest and intersection with this conversation right now. Now, really, the big part is, like everybody else, we see this non-degree credentials as a path for non-traditional learners to be connected to the traditional side of degree granting part, and also connecting learners with the more learners with the institutional higher education. So we really value this body of work, and very excited that joining this part for this conversation.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Scott Cheney. I'm the CEO at Credential Engine. We are a nonprofit organization started by Holly Zanville over here. It's true. When she was at Lumina to bring all of this information about the entire credentialing ecosystem into structured data. So thank you, Amanda, for calling out the value of structured data. It's a woman after my own heart when you start in a room with structured data conversations. So we work on non-degree credentials in a number of ways. First of all, we do not at Credential Engine define anything ourselves. We work with the community to come up with definitions and to develop definitions. So as new credentials are coming into the field, you'll never see us put forward our own definition. We'll convene a task group. We'll have others help us make sure that it is being defined in a way that makes sense for the community and that we can collect information about it. We're actually just about to work with Rutgers and George Washington for the new non-degree taxonomy to make sure that that gets published into our data schema so it can be used in the field. For those of you who haven't seen some of our numbers, we know that there's about 1 million credentials in the United States. The vast majority of those are non-degree or non-credit credentials. And our new report that's coming out probably in December of this year will show a pretty sizable increase in the number of non-degree credentials that are available in the marketplace. We are also doing, so we collect information on all of these types of credentials, not just the provider and the credential itself, but the skills and the quality indicators, the outcome data, the transfer data. So we work with ACE, not ACE. We go there to get our hardware. We work with ACE to publish all of their transfer recommendations. We're going to start working pretty intensively soon. We're going to identify, we think, 3 states where our goal is to get as much data, if not all data, about all non-degree credentials that are available to residents of those states. And really, for the first time, we think, have a very comprehensive, the most comprehensive census of non-degree programs in a state that's been available. So we haven't picked the states yet, but we're going to start working on that soon. So if anyone has any recommendations for that, let me know. And then we're doing a bunch of other things, but I'll save those.
So kind of returning to some of those definitions we started with, I think as we were reflecting on this topic, there are certain areas potentially where there's maybe more confusion than others. And one of those tensions is the differences between a micro-credential versus a badge versus a certificate. So I just throw that out there as a point of confusion and would ask our panelists to respond with some ideas on what is each of them, or how do we make sense of what each of these are and the definitions for each of these that are currently in use in the field? How do we think about them?
All right, I guess I will start. So I will start by saying something that I think some of my members would find a little controversial, but the more that I engage in the space, the less I think the actual definition of the credential matters, right? And so, yes, I hear some, ooh. And here's why. As we move into a space where the contents of the credential are becoming more transparent and more interoperable, as we think about what is in the credential itself, that's actually what's important. The meat of the credential and the data that is captured by whatever package you happen to put it into. And so a lot of the packages are very flashy right now. It's really like people want to have a badge, they want to have a micro credential, and they mix those things up. And I will say ACRO, as a group of folks who find the research value important and you need to name things and agree on a name. We put together a nomenclature committee and we've got people debating on lots of these kinds of definitions. But actually what's more important is really agreeing on how are we talking about them? What are the common points that we're articulating across all of these so that we can compare them, so that a learner can actually consider how one credential might articulate better into a different pathway. Because that's ultimately where we're trying to get, right? We want to make sure that all learning is recognized and that pathways between traditional methods of learning are more permeable. So someone who earns a workforce-based credential can start to see the value of that workforce-based credential, and an institution can judge, can that person successfully navigate into another pathway? And so that's the controversial thing that I would say that not all of my members would agree with, but it's becoming more and more real to me at this place.
I kind of want to hop in there because I thought I was going to have an unpopular opinion as somebody who reports to a registrar for work, and you just gave me permission, Melanie, to kind of go there and say, I don't think
Christy,
it matters.
It's my fault.
An example that I often think of is, I can call my friend in England and he might tell me about how he was like watching some lads from the club playing football on a pitch. And I'm hearing in my head, oh, he's talking about some guys from a team playing soccer on grass. And no meaning's lost, even though we're not, using the same words to talk about the same thing. And that's sort of how I think about it. To Melanie's point, it's not about the badge. Like, even though that's, I think, a lot about badges, it's not about the badge. I think that these are containers. And, I think that it's really important that it not be about the badge, because where all this goes, going back to Amanda's point earlier about, we've gone from 100 opportunity seekers to call it 3,000 opportunity seekers for those 5 jobs that she referenced, or 5 interviews that she referenced in the last panel. And, historically, all of our resources on the filtering side are go into pitchforks to move hay to try and find needles. And that just is like, but we're looking for needles. Like, what if instead of pitchforks, we used magnets to find needles? And what if, going to Melanie's point about containers, these micro-credentials, these badges, whatever we're calling them, CLRs, what if they are magnetizing the needles so they're more discoverable to magnets, so that we can shift our resources to finding what we're actually looking for, not just filtering out what we're not as a way of discovery. And I think that that's where the meaningfulness comes in. And I think that's where a lot of the important work of Credential Engine and Credlens and ACE comes in, is when we think of these containers, most of us have containers in our kitchens that on the side of the container tell us what's inside. We need that for credentials. We need stuff that tells us what's inside in ways that the magnets can make sense of.
Just wondering how far you can take that analogy.
Really nice metaphor.
Anyone can pick that one up in future panels and run with it. I can't agree more, and that's actually the entire reason that we were created, and that is our mission, is to make sure that the information in these packages, I don't care if you call it a badge, a certificate, a certification, a degree, they're just packaging of skills and experiences, and we need that information to be described in consistent ways and to be transparent and interoperable and structured and all the other terms, and then it can be discoverable. So I kind of like, look, it's American education. We're not going to stop the creation of new things, nor should we, right? We're always trying to have new packaging of skills to meet new requirements in the workplace, and we have new packaging of skills for AI now that we didn't have 15 years ago, and that's great. And if you want to call it a micro mini masters, I don't care, seriously, because someone is going to do that. And that's going to be a marketing pitch to get people in the door. But as long as the information about what's in the micro mini masters for AI is clear and transparent and operational and interoperable, then call it what you want and have it be accessible so a student can see it and to know what's in it, and is it accredited, and is it, what are the outcomes for that? That's what's important. And so let's not, yes, we need to define things. Sorry, Michelle, this is the topic of the panel. We need to have definitions of things, but I don't really want to spend a lot of time chasing the perfect definition. And because honestly, you look in the credential registry right now, what one institution calls one thing, another institution is going to call a different thing, and that's okay. That's okay as long as it's clear and defined and described and usable by an individual. So I don't chase the goose all that much.
I would just add to that also that, we're not just talking about the U.S. And so we're not going to agree in the U.S. on what to call things. We're absolutely not going to agree globally on what to call things. How many UNESCO conversations have I been on? Like research conversations about let's define these things. Great, but we're not gonna all agree, and I don't think we have to. I think as long as we're clear about what we're talking about. And so I would rather spend energy on really deep diving on what are the things that we need from each side, from the learner side, from the institutional side, from the employer side. What do we need to know about a credential to make a judgment on it and to understand its applicability in the multitude of spheres that it might be consumed or applied to? And if we can determine that clearly, well, then that's the battle. What we call things like what we call things will eventually settle out as they become more, and there'll be another thing that we add to the taxonomy that is more universal or not. But I think what's inside is what's important.
We just hosted, Melanie and I hosted a group from South Africa, the South African Qualifications Authority, and one of the meetings we took was over at ACE, and it was hysterical having them quiz Hiro and Derek Anderson about, okay, what exactly is a JD, and what is an EDD, and what exactly is a PhD, and why are they different, and how do they, and you would think that those would be the easy ones, but just translating them between countries so that they could understand, do I give, if someone comes to the South Africa with a certain credential, what is it and how do I recognize it? What's the equivalent here? And it was the easy ones.
Okay. Well, so I'm going to just ask you to, I mean, I think this is a really important issue for us to unpack further, is what information do we need to know about credentials? But I want to push just a little bit further on just the particulars of definitions that are currently in use, just so we can kind of pull that out. Okay, so I'll just offer as like maybe a point of reaction is that, Chris's definition, Chris Mullen's definition of a micro credential, for example, is that it is short, it is specific. I guess if you were going to operationalize it, it would be less than 12 credits. So I know we don't want to do credit equivalencies, but it's something that's supposed to be relatively short, possibly shorter than that. How do you react to that? I mean, what do you see in use in the field? And do you see, I guess the question is things are very chaotic, but do we see any alignment? Is there any alignment in these credential definitions? Or are there particular points where it's very contentious? Do we see points of disagreement in the current field before we move to having more information and that full set of disclosures of what's in a credential?
So I'll say that my members spent a good amount of time looking at micro credentials, and one of the challenges that they came across is that micro credentials, they think about them much like a certificate, right? And they spend a lot of time debating between the difference is, what's the difference between a micro credential and a certificate? And ultimately, there's not much difference. That the micro credential is a newer packaging, a newer articulation, but we've been offering certificates forever, right? Those have been a thing that we understand, and so all we could kind of agree on was that it was a smaller package of learning than a degree, and that it was a little bit more directed and specific than a degree. But that was about as far as the membership could get. I'm personally okay with that. Yeah, that I don't think as we start to pursue those, I think just even having that level of agreement is enough to start to produce and think about those kinds of credentials. I don't know what my colleagues think about that.
Well, I think the number is very pragmatic, easy to understand, and seemingly objective way of sort of sorting out the different types of credentials, right? Somebody thought that 120 is a good number for a bachelor's degree, and that idea got stuck for, I don't know, pretty long time. So in that sense, I think it's a useful way to organize the discussion like this one, or discussion around the policy on financial aid or any sort of the funding formula and other things. Now, the part that's not quite explained by those numbers is that what does that exactly mean for sort of learning outcomes for students around it. I'd like to think that bachelor's degrees or master's degrees or doctoral degrees have something more than sort of aggregation of course credits. There's something in between that happens, and the threshold doesn't quite capture that. But I think it's a good enough and a good way to organize those, and it's sort of to Melanie and Scott's point around that. I don't think we can come up with a perfect label to call something. So, I'd much prefer using sort of numeric threshold to sort of organize our discussion and segment our discussion in that way.
I would just add to that also is that numeric threshold it is the sort of currency of higher education, right? Is the credit hour. The credit hour wasn't really designed to do what it does. It wasn't designed to carry the weight of the entire budget of the institution. It just wasn't designed for that. But that is actually what it does now. It is a useful cheat on the record side of the house when we're trying to translate across systems. We do it in higher education across institutions. We do it in higher education across national systems, so international universities. We have a general rule of thumb when we think about the number, and there's a natural level of learning in numerical and hourly terms that someone can do in a year in a higher education setting, and we calculate that out to align with our definition of a credit, and that's how that works. I think that the increase in providers and modalities for people to learn is stretching that and taxing that. And I think that institutions are they need other signals. Those signals are evolving to become, I think, skills and competencies, but we need more information than that. So again, I'm getting down into the details of what's inside the container. There are lots of important markers that give us information, and how you translate it into that credit number is an important marker, and will probably become an important marker as short-term Pell evolves. I think ultimately there's going to be a numerical marker, because that's how we do things in research and data. But I think we don't know what that's going to be yet.
I guess one thing that I'll just piggyback on that, Melanie, is I also think it depends on the constituency of who's the audience for it, right? Like a registrar audience is thinking about it in a very certain way, right? Like, or at least 80, I almost think about the beverage industry, at least 80% of this learning has to come from the micro region, in order for this to be a micro credential. But I also, at CU Boulder, one of the sort of unofficial markers when people are thinking, I might want to propose a micro credential, do I have a viable one on my hands? And, one of the things that I ask them is, who cares? Besides the person who's coming up with this potential micro credential, and maybe the earner's mother, who's bound by social contract to unconditionally love and care, who else cares about what's coming in, and how do they trust it, right? And so it's not just about the hours that go into it. That's not where the trust comes in, right? It's what does an earner know, and what are they able to do as a result of this, and how did we validate that, right? And that's kind of an uncomfortable conversation, especially with our academic side of the house micro credentials. Sometimes is they'll propose, and maybe the earning criteria will be something initially along the lines of, well, they have to pass 7 out of 10 quizzes with an 80% or higher. So, okay, well, what does that mean? Like, what are those quizzes? Cuisine. How about we put that as what we're doing? And then let's value. Basically, it comes down to trust, right? What is this, and how do I trust it? And I think that's really what's important when we talk about just what are we talking about with micro credentials.
Scott, I'm going to put you on the spot, though. I know you're in the process of working on the county credentials report for the coming year, and I'm wondering if you can say anything about kind of maybe current thinking about how you're categorizing the credentials as you are counting them. I mean, you do have to come up with categories and report out on them. So, is there any evolution in your thinking there about the field that you can share with us?
So, for the first time this year, this is our 5th edition of the report. For the first time, we've actually pulled together a research advisory group to help us go through the process of coming up with those categories. And sadly, a research advisory group is going to be really good at coming up with categories and helping you put together, this is what it should look like. But we're a little bit dependent still, until we actually have information on all 1 million credentials, we're dependent on the data sources. And so to some degree, we can come up with this phenomenally good list of categories of what we want to capture and what we think is out there. But if we can't get to the data about those particular categories, we really can't do an enumeration of what's out there. So we are stuck somewhat with being dependent on what does iPads have? What do we get from WIOA? Sorry, it's so we have I think ideal lists of categories, but we're going to somewhat fall back into the less than perfect because that's where we can get the data. We're pretty sure that we know where that we're going to get an accurate count, or at least a 95% accurate count. There's always things that we're not able to get our hands around, but the categories will look not dissimilar from what we've done in the past, because the data sources haven't changed all that much, which is why I continue to drive to eventually we'll have information on all 1 million credentials, and we'll be the place that you can know, oh, those are the credentials that are out there, and not have to go dig up and deduplicate across multiple data sources to figure out what's out there. We honestly, at this point, don't know what that count's going to look like. We're doing a lot of work, coming back to the question of badges. As digital badges actually proliferate, and we're seeing that digital badges are being issued for things like degrees or an occupational license or a certification or a certificate, we know that there's a lot of duplication, that you can actually have a degree from Ivy Tech and have a digital badge from Ivy Tech for that degree. So we're doing a lot of work this year to try and deduplicate that, and we don't know as the number of unique badges that aren't a replicant of a degree, as those grow on their own, is the number still going to be about 1 million? Are we going to come up short of that because we have a lot of duplication? We honestly just don't know. So December, stay tuned.
All right, well, let's see. Maybe we'll make this like an informal addition to your research advisory group. We did have an interactive kind of portion of this presentation. We wanted to hear from you all. How are you thinking about these different credentials we're talking about? So we've got 3 Slidos here for you to answer, 3 questions. So first one is, what is a badge? Then there'll be, what is a micro-credential? And then, what is a certificate? So if you all want to take a moment out and just give us your thoughts on what is a badge, and we can see, what everyone else is thinking too. This will be interesting. There you go.
Yeah. That is the wrong question. I want to hear from that person.
The right question is.
Yeah.
That fell out of favor.
From that fell out of favor. Uh-oh, for Badge Summit.
Interesting. Wow.
Ah, yeah. I love it.
Let everyone get in your final responses here. Interesting.
Flashy award.
Rhoda.
Approach to a future. Oh, I love
Okay.
it.
All right. So that was really interesting. We'll move on to the next question. What is a micro-credential?
He thinks they need a break.
Okay.
Something that's going through my mind as people are answering the second question was micro-credentials. We saw what is a badge is just really validating Melanie's point of maybe like the definition is not the be-all end-all, that we have a room full of the leading researchers in the space, the leading funders and people who've been working on this for years. and we have pretty close to zero consensus on what one of the top terms really means, and yet we're in a place where we've gone in about 15 years from these things not existing to most people in developed countries being just a degree or two of separation away from having a badge or knowing somebody who's earned a badge. So the proliferation of meaningfulness is clearly happening even without that shared understanding of what it is.
Yeah, I'll add to that so 15, 16 years ago, ACRO, my association, embarked on a path to think about credentialing people who were engaging in what at that time was a relatively new field of enrollment management. And so we created a learning program that taught people the skills and the competencies required to think about an institution's enrollment holistically. And there's lots of research. It was already, the research was happening and all of that. But the board of directors at the time said that we couldn't call it a certificate because we weren't a degree granting institution. Right? So we called it SEM EP, a SEM endorsement program. And that was what we were allowed to call it based on the board's decision. Oh, strategic enrollment management. It's sort of ACRO's flavor of enrollment management, which is bigger than recruitment and marketing. So fast forward to now, and we are in the 4th year of a strategic plan where our board of directors has directed us to create credentialed career pathways for the professions that we serve. And so that's an entirely, in a very short amount of time, flip from an organization that protects the institutional credential, that extends this network of trust. So it tells you how much that this field has changed in the last 15 years. We issue now badges. We issue short-term credentials, and we are on our way to building certification pathways, which we understand have clear definitions, right? Certification is different from a certificate and from a badge or a shorter credential.
So now on to responding to that, what is it? What is a certificate? Do you all have definitions of certificates? I mean, some places apparently do have very strict definitions, but perhaps there's more variation there too. I'm curious where everyone lands on this one.
A piece of paper. Okay, people are feeling cheeky.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
But it probably would take about 2 years, so that's fair.
That's
right?
fair.
But while these are coming up, just going back to Paul's comments this morning, we're about to see a lot more money and a lot more focus on people getting these things, and we're having a hard time defining them. And so there needs to be a lot of effort to try and help make sure that that money is spent in ways that actually yields value to individuals. And I don't know. I don't know the degree to which that conversation is really happening yet, because we don't really know what's coming, to Paul's point. But it is a little frightening that we're going to put a lot more effort into these things, and we're having a hard time clearly understanding them.
I like the what IPED says it is.
iPed says it
My
is.
members would agree with that.
That does
If
go to
IPED says we're going to comply with that,
some power in definitions, apparently.
there is power, but we need to understand what's in it, right? Like the definitions only work if you have a really strong data dictionary to back them up. And so that's really what I think is most important in this innovative space.
So why don't we turn the conversation to that topic? I think we do want to unpack that. I think during our prep call, that was one of the most interesting, places that our conversation went. And I will say Noah used a term that I think is captures the idea really well, which is the idea of maybe we need a nutritional label for credentials, something that provides information on all the contents of what you would expect to get from the credential. And so I'm curious to hear from each of you, if you could talk a little bit more about what is it we actually do need to know. Like if we did want to convey information about a credential, what are the essential elements that we need to convey? What kind of information do consumers need to know to understand what a credential means?
Do you want me to jump in and start, and then you all can jam on that further? I mean, I think from a record standpoint, and I'm thinking about it from a practitioner and a transferability standpoint. We want to know content knowledge. We want to know some skills and competencies. We want to know a quality marker of some sort, right? And there are multiple different kinds of quality markers that a credential could have. We also want to understand something about time. In higher education, we like to know something about time. And that may be one of those markers that are going to start to disappear as modalities change, but it is one that if that marker is available, we want to understand it. How long does it take you to earn that? How many hours of learning is it? And that again, I think could go away. Oh, somebody has their hand raised. Are we taking questions yet?
You said content knowledge, skills, some quality assurance indicator, time. I would add cost. I would add outcome, delivery method, and is there some ability to have it transfer, or whatever term you want to use, stackability, pathways, whatever that is, but it's not a standalone, isolated thing unto itself, or is it? Is that's something you want to have some sense of?
I want to press back just a little bit on the delivery method, because I will say that, again, 15 years ago, we cared if something was offered online or not, and now we don't.
So I'm not sure that I think the student cares. The student wants to know,
learner cares.
Do I have to show up to the place,
yep,
or can I take it? So for that nutrition label, I just think that the student needs to know that.
Okay, noted.
And the Credential Engine also has reports recommending, from an equity lens, that we can also be including information about wraparound supports, financial aid. These are things that we can be communicating so that consumer, right, they know what they're buying, they are considering buying. That what is the credentialing? Right, like I graduated from undergrad with something like 1 or 2 million credit hours in Spanish. I then moved to the Dominican Republic. I got in a cab and told them the address of the apartment that my new job had sent me. And he said something back to me. And then I repeated it. And he had said something back to me that was it. And after a minute, I had to just get out the MapQuest directions that I had printed off before flying there and hand it to him, because despite my insane number of hours of time learning Spanish, I couldn't get from A to B in the Spanish language. And so there was my transcript in a way was a unreliable narrator of my credential and what I could actually do with it. I did go on later to be a really good Spanish teacher, by the way, but at the time I couldn't even get from A to B.
I think that's sort of difference between the nutrition list and the ingredients list part around it, right?
Ooh, I like that.
So I bake occasionally. The joke is that I run, swim, and bake, and that's my form of a triathlon. But I know what's in my cake or bread or whatever, but I have no idea how those ingredients react to each other and produce flavor or nutrition or whatever that might be. So, transcript is kind of ingredients list. I have no idea how my natural resource economics class that I took a long time ago and early Christianity history is serving me at this very particular moment. But I'm guessing something happened that between 150 some credits that I took in undergrad and a few more during my master's and a PhD, is making up this excellent skill of make stuff up as I go in very authoritative form. But I think that's the kind of part that a little bit challenging me in thinking about, what's the most important information that we need to be providing. And in part that I think there's still value for traditional degrees in long run, because I like to believe that it's more than aggregation or sort of stucked up sort of courses. It's not Lego pieces, right? It's not Lego set that we are talking about. Lego set, you look at the different blocks and you create something. Sometimes you can make rocket and sometimes you can make the Star Wars ship. I mean, that's creating something, but that's just sort of the aggregation of the pieces you have. But we're talking about a nutritionist, and depending on which combination, similar kind of ingredients could make very different kind of outcomes. And how do we account for that? I think that's sort of the more challenging part that could be beyond the sort of threshold number to organize a conversation. But what exactly does that mean for outcomes and the value added for like individual learners?
And Hiro, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't that something that ACE really specializes in the ecosystem, along in partnership with standards organizations, right? Like IEEE and in my case as a language person, ACTFL, the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages, that you can look at their standards and say, oh, here's the can-do statements for somebody who's intermediate high in Polish, and then use that in order to make credit recommendations. Am I making that up? That's one of the things that ACE can specialize in, with helping people make meaning that they can then use to apply to credentials for those nutritional labels.
I mean, that's sort of part of it. Some are individual course level equivalency, and some are a little bit more bundle, like apprenticeship and a certificate kind of spaces too. But I think that's the kind of work that that need to be sort of thinking around, like, how do we help make sense of things, and how do we sort of figure out again, like, how different type of learning, like, when it's stuck together, it's not always just simple sums. So, like, how do we make sense of it, and what counts, and in an equivalency space?
Okay, I think I had seen a
I said
question
there
or
are
a
a few
comment. We
questions
got a few
out
of these.
there.
Okay. Peter, I think I'd seen you raise your hand a while ago. So.
I'm curious. I love the nutritional label with ingredients contrast. It's my head for a while and I can see it. RDA, recommend daily. Not take it so far, but you mean like you look at 100,000 IUs of vitamin A, and maybe that's a lot, or maybe it's not. I don't really know. Without an RDA, what's the RDA? Analogy, qualities that have been invested in.
I think the RDA parallel depends on what you want to do with it, right? So different employers, different disciplines are going to have an RDA. So, like, one of the things as I think about the evolution of credentials and skills and representation, I often think that the regulated professions, in particular healthcare, is one that really does think about, in a very granular way, what are the things that people need to know and understand. And they're pretty prescriptive in that. And so in that space, that's pretty well defined, even as things are innovating and changing. There's this whole amorphous other, in terms of other kinds of careers and professions that you might want to do. And that's, I think, where the challenge is. But to me, in a lot of ways, if we can focus on at least the regulated stuff, we can start there. And I think we'll learn valuable lessons to figure out what's the RDA. Because what you need for different professions is going to be different, and different individual desires is going to be different.
Jennifer.
So I'm from IEEE, which is a profession. And we do standards. We also
Thank you.
But you know, we also do credentialing. We validate credentials for a lot of engineering technical professionals. And I talk to a lot of employers. And you know, in our world, credentials something very specific. So, you know, a certificate carrying continuing education, professional development out, that matters to a professional engineer. You know, when we talk about micro credentials, we talk credential that says you know how to do a thing. But conversation earlier where you were saying, oh, it doesn't matter what the name is. I just, in my experience in talking to a lot of employers, you know, a lot of them say this micro credential thing means nothing to me because everybody needs something different. And I think there really is value in coming to consensus because the reality is the employer is not necessarily going to read the ingredients or the nutrition label. They want to know can you do the thing. And so I guess I just throw that out there.
But
What do you think about that?
yes, and this is why it's important to have all the information about what's in that micro credential or that certificate as structured data so that they don't have to read it, but their systems do.
Yeah.
Right? Their systems and Lord, we're about to go into a whole separate conversation of what's it going to take to actually get to the point. And going back to Amanda's point, you know, it's really hard right now, but we have to get to the point where we can quickly assess those 5,000 submissions to say who has the validated skills that I need for this position, and then I can go have the interview to get to those interpersonal kind of conversations. But we're just not going to get to a point in this country, because we don't do things like that in this country, where we have the perfect definition of what a micro credential is, because it's going to shift. And that's why I say, to me, I don't care what we call it, so long as what's in it, the ingredient list or the nutrition label or something else, is available. As I go back always to the analogy of travel, right? I know that if I book a Marriott and they say I have a king size bed in a corner room, I'm getting what I'm getting because I trust that that information has been shared in a way that I'm not going to walk in and find a twin bed with a crib in the attic, you know. And we don't do that. We're getting there, but we don't do it well enough yet to be able to not worry about what you name it. I don't care if they call it a resort or a micro hotel or something. I know what I'm going to get. And that's what we're trying to get to here. So that's why I say I'm not as worried about what we call it, as long as you know what's in it.
I know we have some folks who want to make comments. So Roy, and then in the back, I know you had your hand raised. So maybe Roy.
Yeah, we of course we agree with Credential Engine and ACRO about the ingredients. That's what we're all about at WCRED, and an affiliate of the American National Standards Institute, of which I typically is a member. The purpose is one of the major elements. The stated purpose of what that credential is supposed to do, and then there's an evaluation as whether that credential is actually doing what it's supposed to do, is one of the most important things we could look. And we wish higher education would teach more standards even in their School of Engineering, because it's a major issue that there is a formal standard system by which evaluation could occur against those standards, but higher education does not seem to understand that formal system that is associated internationally with ISO, International Organization for Standardization, that can also then translate across borders of countries in this regard.
So I would simply say that's one of the quality indicators. Is that credential, you know, been reviewed and shown to do what it purports to do? So that's a quality indicator that could be on the ingredient list.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go on.
One just follow up comment to that. Yes, I agree with that. But the one thing I would add is that I think making sure that credential issuers have enough information so that that person who earned that credential in 15 years, when they need to change fields because the cheese has moved, that there's enough information in that credential for them to be able to engage into whatever that next pathway is. And so, yes, but I think it has to be, and we have to, as workforce credentials develop, and they're going to, and it's important for those, there has to be enough information embedded in them so that pathways between disciplines or jobs or whatever are more permeable, that we can translate and help someone make that jump to the next thing.
Okay. Other comments? Go ahead.
I just wanted to add a small comment that I find it really interesting that we're talking very much about definition, outcomes. We're not really naming or factor in this, which is are the ones that are sort of judging a lot of this and deciding. Not really in the, I mean, I think it just would be fascinating to have in this as we think about those meanings and the definitions and what's what is that, I mean, I think I'm one of those people that nobody does because if you have something that the employer is not going to value, and if you don't have a way even of understanding whether certification doesn't really have as much meaning. Part of the outcome that we're talking about and dancing around is that people get good jobs. And if employers don't know what the thing is, I mean, that's just a huge miss. I think, kind of flipping it on its head, I mean, there are organizations that do use short term that employers, buy to be candidates from, and to the point of even funding those organizations to $5,000 per student. So, I think, and I'm speaking about Europe program, part of it, but there's something to be learned from some of these, I think, organizations that they're doing it like.
One more comment to close us out. I know, Jeff, you had your hand raised before you wanted to.
Oftentimes this conversation is framed around removing the confusion from the ecosystem of Credential. I think all four of you just added a lot of confusion by telling us it doesn't matter how we define them, though each of you use them professionally as a shortcut. So perhaps in ending, you can tell us why it would be helpful to actually have a meaningful definition to badge or micro-credential, all of which on the stage use those terms knowingly, especially in a consumer information. Why would it be valuable, not why it shouldn't?
I think yeah, it is. That's another whole panel. But I do agree
wants
that
lunch. It's okay.
names do mean something, but they've evolved over time, right? And so I think that the key piece is talking about them and making sure that we're transparent about what's in them. I do think a name will eventually settle, the way degrees and certificates and such have happened. But the transparency is what's really important from a consumer perspective. And so I think that's all I would say about that.
And I would connect it to what our colleague over here just said about employers valuing it, and that I guess maybe we didn't show our work in saying when it doesn't matter. We're envisioning a near future where that problem of finding those needles in the haystack, to go back to that analogy, is the humans are the last mile of that, and the machines are doing the interpretation. So I think that's, at least personally, where I'm saying it doesn't matter what we call it, because machines are going to be able to figure out, the AI is going to figure out, oh, this aligns with this standard from this organization. Here's stuff from the syllabus, to pull Amanda's example out from earlier, right? That all of that work is happening to find out what it means on the front end with the AI, so that the AI doesn't care about what it's called.
And so when you're dealing with the consumer public coming to you as a micro-credential, and you're telling me it doesn't announcing that you're using it professionally. But now you're telling me it's irrelevant what it is because you can just call it whatever you want. And I'm a little bit confused about we're using a label, but then saying it doesn't matter when I'm saying what it is.
Yeah, I guess maybe the way I did it maybe was maybe I was not expressing myself clear because I totally agree with you. There's a consumer protect, like we have policy at our university that lays out exactly what they are, and I think that for the consumer facing that is important. I think that as far as an ecosystem in which they're operationalized, it's not about what we're calling it, it's about what it's telling a consumer that it means.
So, I love confusion. But just I think one quick comment. So just like a nutrition label or ingredients list, and the two, back to your comment around it. I've been thinking about like, who are we trying to make this nutrition label or ingredients for? Like, is this for learners so that they know what they are getting themselves into, or is it for employers so that they can have some level of assurance that what they're employing? Well, needs to be both is the one, but I don't know if there's like if that's needs to be both, but I'm not sure that if we can have one solution to satisfy both the needs, and if we are trying to chase that sort of one solution that meets both employers as a consumer and the learners as a consumer's needs, we might not get there.
I know everyone's dying to go to lunch. I'm so sorry.
You just saved me having to answer the question.
There we go.
I'm trying to use Scott from
What I really want to point out here is that I keep bumping up against what you just said that the learners, and they're not even monolith, but let's just say like generational swaps can be narrower and narrower. Some of this was spurred on by, I'll count myself as a third person. Young people don't want to show up to work. They're not responsible for all the things they're saying. And then I've worked with workers, like, right? And they don't even care about all the things that we all care about. Those of us who went to libraries, right? They're like, you can go school information. We all show up and do cool stuff inside your semiconductor or all the things. So I want to point out like this question of like what employers want, what learners want, the way that this what was happening with AI is like we finally got push on the like all now like in the air and the old people are trying to figure it out and the young people are like, good job, man, like AI is screening me out, I don't know what to do. Okay, so that's my observation of like
Thank you.
huge delta of what you just said, Hiro,
Yeah.
and you've been saying why it's messy.
Yep.
We got pushed off the foot, and then we got politics and pushing off the foot, and like. Okay, so.
Well, this is great. This is a good sign. This discussion is going. I do want to actually add one thing, Jeff, to your question. This, I think, Scott, I think you might have raised this. I'm sorry, I'm adding on to this, but the idea that institutions are doing different things, and it's going to be hard to force them to do the same thing. I think that's the point, is that they're continually changing and morphing and trying to out compete each other and out innovate each other. That when Scott explained that, I was like, oh yeah, I get your argument. That's what made this whole thing clicked me. Anyway, that's enough. I know we have lunch. Everyone wants to eat. So I want to thank our panelists for a really lively discussion, and thank you all.
I'm gonna take 1 second though. The idea of a nutrition label or an ingredient list is really valuable. So if you have ideas of what should be on it, because we want to start promoting that and saying to everyone who's publishing their information to us, here's the minimum, here's kind of that nutrition label, fill it in, and I'd love to know what you think should be on it. So
And I should say one other thing too. At the end of the conference, during the reception, we are going to designate parts of the room to continue discussions from particular panels, and the panelists will congregate there. So if you want to keep talking on this, we'll have more time later.